friends. Welcome to episode 92 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 14th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and our listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Sandy in California and Melissa in Georgia. Christine in North Carolina wrote me with some very exciting news, and I asked her if I could share it with the listeners. Christine listened to episode number 49, posted on November 7th, 2019, and my conversation with Amanda Jones, Free Money and How to Stretch Your Budget. She initially asked and received $640 in a grant to cover the subscription costs of an access to a digital encyclopedia. And what happened next is pretty fantastic. A representative from the corporation requested to have a Zoom meeting with Christine and her principal. At the end of the meeting, she ended up with $4,000, which also included funds to support the other building specials. So, a couple important mentions from Christine's experience. First of all, try. Take a chance. Never undersell your grant. Your request is important and deserving of funding. School librarians are trusted stewards of resources supporting everyone in our school communities. The optics are fantastic for these corporations, and awarding grants to librarians means an equitable distribution across age groups and subject matter. And another takeaway, and this one's just selfish, listening to episodes which are almost a year old apparently still have value. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Media Literacy Essentials, and my interview with Melissa Thom and Jacquelyn Whiting. I'm so excited for this conversation today, and you're going to see why in just a second. We have two guests to tackle today's topic of news and media literacy. First, you'll recognize our guest, Melissa Thom. She is scoring a hat trick, hockey fans, and returning for a third episode. So to those of you who are quietly considering contacting me about doing an episode, this is Melissa's third trip round, and so clearly it's a lot of fun. We first heard Melissa in December of 2019, episode 52, School-Wide Culture of Reading. And again, this past May, we had episode 77, and that was sort of a virtual take, a virtual culture of reading. And I'm so excited that she's here today with us. Melissa, Thom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I am very excited, and I just have to throw out for bowling fans, it's a turkey. I have episodes on your show, just not in a row, but free.
Melissa Thom is scoring a turkey for our bowling fans. Thank you so much. Now, Melissa, you have an incredibly extensive PLN that you've acquired during your career as a school librarian. But when this topic came up, you knew exactly who you wanted to share this conversation with, and that is Jacquelyn Whiting. And we're going to learn a lot about Jacquelyn in this conversation. Would you please share with listeners why this was an obvious choice for you?
Absolutely. So I have known Jackie for probably around 5 years, which is when I entered the librarian field. And we have had the opportunity in the last few months to work a lot more closely with one another. in our new roles as topic page editors for School Library Connection. I'm the reading topic page editor, which I'm very excited about. And Jackie is the information literacy topic editor. So immediately from my past relationship with her and seeing all the work she's been doing throughout the state and nationally in Connecticut here, and then with that updated position, I knew that she's somebody that could teach me a lot of things, because there's a lot of things that I don't know about this topic either, and I'm very excited to learn about. And I just wanted to share a couple of things about her that she may not share about herself. But I want people to know that in 2016, she was a recipient of, is it Connection or Connecticut? I wasn't sure if there was a mistake in the bio, but Connection Region 9 Teacher of the Year Award, which is amazing. And then in 2017, she was a winner of the Carlton W.H. Erickson Award for, quote, an auspicious beginning in media services. And that's through CASEL, the Connecticut Association of School Librarians. So those two very awesome recognitions. And then if that wasn't enough, she is also the co-editor of a really important book on this topic of news and media literacy entitled News Literacy, The Keys to Combating Fake News. So I don't think there's any surprise why she was the first person that came to mind when we talked about this topic.
Well, and friends, I'll tell you, my amateur detective skills using Jackie's Twitter handle and bio would not give you any idea that we have amongst us a celebrity when it comes to media literacy. So, Jackie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. You are both so incredibly kind. I would never call myself an expert. I just like to think of myself as a lead learner. So we're all in this together as the tide keeps shifting and the rules of the game keep shifting as we all try to keep up with our own ability to be news and media literate. So thank you so much for inviting me to join the conversation today.
Jackie, let's start off with some definitions, because digital literacy and media and news literacy are not meant to be used interchangeably. And yet, as a school librarian who says, oh, I teach digital literacy all the time, I do not know how media literacy is part of that conversation or different. So could you give that sort of clarification before we get started?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great place to start. I think that there's a lot of people who use those terms interchangeably. And at the same time, there's as many people who really insist on distinctions between them. And I think a third term can get added into that mix, which is digital citizenship, right? Mm-hmm. So, if I were to try to define them in a word, I think of digital literacy as the process that someone uses. And I think of media literacy as the substance that someone is trying to uncover. And then digital citizenship really is the habit of mind that you bring to how you do this work. So let me elaborate a little bit, right? Media is content, and it's content created for a purpose. So if we want to be literate in media, we have to bring to that understanding, bring to that deconstructing of media, that understanding that someone wants us to do something, say something, believe something, buy something as a consequence of interacting with that media. And the digital literacy component of that is I know how media was constructed. I know how networks work. I understand the role of algorithms in the distribution of this material to me. Once I receive the material, my media literacy helps me make meaning of it and act responsibly in response to it.
Got it. Okay. Well, and again, friends, it's very obvious from this conversation who the experts are, and I'm happy to provide a platform. So let me ask you, Melissa, you are entirely the reason why this episode is happening. And I know that timing is really important because of upcoming Media Literacy Week. Could you tell us about this week and how you will be acknowledging it in your library through CASEL, which is the Connecticut Association of School Librarians, if not mistaken, as well as the Connecticut State Association for School Librarians?
Yes. Actually, I was not aware that there was such a thing as Media Literacy Week until this summer when I was hired by Connecticut Public to work with their Thinkalong product. It is an online website that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. But so I was very excited to find out that there is a Media Literacy Week, and that is going to be October 26th to the 30th. So in about a month from probably when you're listening to this episode, if you're listening when it first comes out. And I learned a little bit about it. It was actually inspired by Canada's Media Literacy Week, and it's hosted by the National Association for Media Literacy Education, NAMLE, I think is how they say the acronym. And I think you may mention that a little bit later on, but one of the things I want people to know just basically about NAMLE is that you can sign up and you can get a free membership. So take advantage of that. It is a national organization with lots of resources that you might address a little bit later. And I know there's going to be information in the show notes about that as well. And the mission is really to highlight the power of media literacy education and its essential role all across the country, both in Canada and the United States. And it just really calls attention to media literacy by bringing together hundreds of partners and for events and activities all around the country. And the theme this year is going to celebrate one of the 5 components of the media literacy's definition according to NAMLE, one each week. And those 5, first is access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. And you can get a lot more information about this on the NAMLE website. You can sign up to host an event in your library or in your town. And I kind of want to transition just for a minute to talk a little bit about how that connects with Thinkalong and some of the things that I am hoping to facilitate both in my middle school library as well as for more a statewide focus through the Connecticut Association of School Librarians. Right now, I am currently vice president of that organization. Jackie is also a part of that, and she has done various things with our organization. As I mentioned, she was awarded that really great honor a couple years ago. So I agreed to work with CT Public for as a social media outreach because one of my superpowers really is connecting with people, mostly via Twitter, a little bit via Facebook, but just really making those connections that maybe not are as easy to make since we can't, especially now when we really can't be together in person anywhere for conferences. I really have turned to social media to stay connected to the pulse of the library world. And really what CT Public's mission is to be an essential source for truth and ideas that connects the citizens of Connecticut to their communities and to their world. And every state has their own public organization. So NPR, which I'm sure all of our listeners in the US and maybe some outside are familiar with, CT Public is their affiliate on the state level. And one of their, the mission overall is to I'm going to read from their website, is to inform, educate, and inspire the people of Connecticut, connecting and empowering them through outstanding journalism, storytelling, education, and experiences to make our state a more extraordinary place to live, work, and play. So that's kind of the big umbrella. And then Thinkalong has been around for a few years, but they just made a push for this year to really get it out there to educators and to the wider public. And you can find it at thinkalong.org. Again, it'll be in the show notes. Please follow us on Facebook, join our group. Our goal is to have 100 people in our group by the end of the week, and we're only at 30 right now. So I hope to see lots of people joining us in the next couple of weeks once this podcast drops. And it really is geared towards secondary education as its sweet spot, but it can really, there's so much content, it can be tweaked for elementary as well. And it's even, like you said, Amy, I, like you, have very big gaps in my understanding and knowledge of media and literacy. Media and news literacy. I can't even say it properly. And so I'm always looking for ways to learn more for myself as a citizen of the country, and then as a librarian who is then hopefully going to pass along some of that information to my students, my teachers, and my parents. So Thinkalong is, the purpose of Thinkalong is, it's a free program. And I want to say that again, you pay nothing as an educator. Everything that is put out there, the content, is completely free for anybody to use. And it pulls sources and materials from trusted places like PBS, NPR, and other local public media stations around current event topics. So one of the recent modules they just dropped this last week was, should Supreme Court justices have term limits? Which is obviously, if you're following current events and news, that's all over the place about how our Supreme Court system really works. And the other part of Thinkalong is it's helping students think critically about media. So kind of like Jackie talked about why that's important, and developing informed opinions. We all have opinions. However, the informed opinions are often lacking in conversations for a variety of people, right? And then just the practice of respectful civil discourse, which again, we see that has been a struggle in the last few years. So we want our students to see what they're seeing on media and not just glance through and skim, but really to engage and interact. And the Thinkalong website gives me, as an educator, some really concrete tools to do that.
You've given us so much to think about right now. First of all, the timing. The timing of this episode is very planful. I got to tell you, friends, weeks ago, I got a great gift in my Twitter DMs because Melissa wanted to do this episode, and she explained to me why, and said, but if if Media Literacy Week is the 26th to the 30th, when should this episode come out? I'm like, all right, so we're already planning this. And I, there are a couple things that stand out right now is, first of all, when you think about our show notes as having been curated, we have some fantastic, rich resources in the show notes today. Emphasis, all of these resources that we're sharing with you are free, and they're all curated. And I think that, we've revisited this idea that librarians have an obligation when we support our school communities to be curators rather than just throwing everything at our students and at our staff. We want to be really selective. And I think what I love about this topic is that it's giving the librarians, school librarians, yet another reason to be a valuable contributor to our students' education, irrespective of grade level. And so it's eye-opening to me, and I'm hoping that listeners hear that there are opportunities across the board for us to encourage our students to become just really critical consumers of media, however it comes. And I was looking in some of the resources. This includes how to become critical thinkers when it comes to the video games that they're consuming, when it comes to the television and to the shows that they're streaming, to think critically about the messages that are being, the underlying messages that are found in the media that they're consuming, and not just to sort of take it all in, but to form opinions about what they are consuming, and then be able to be thoughtful when they are discussing this and sharing this and using this.
Can I jump on to something that you just mentioned, Amy?
Please
because
do,
I
Jackie.
think that your comment about the video games, I think, deserves being underscored. I remember probably a decade ago when I was exposed to the way in which media buyers buy a presence within a video game, and thinking about how they target certain demographics of people in the country based on their relationship with video gaming. Just as an example, during the election season, a couple of presidential elections ago, it was a kind of a groundbreaking thing where candidates running for office were buying virtual billboard space in the video game Grand Theft Auto. So as you are virtually careening through the cityscape in your car, you are driving by billboards that are selling political candidates to you. And I thought, what an incredible way to passively target that niche demographic voter, the 18 to 35-year-old young male, right? So really, it's media that we are encountering even when we least expect it, even when we're not aware of it, and yet it's there in front of us, and our brain is working on it, even if in the background, not in the front.
Well, and Jackie, I am not a avid video game player, but I love movies. And I'm very cognizant when I see product placement, and I see it as manipulative. And I think this goes back to being raised on James Bond movies, because there's so much product placement in movies. And I never felt like it was going to somehow skew how the things that I would purchase, because, I'm not in the business of buying expensive automobiles or, I don't know, high-tech weaponry. But, the point is that I'm very cognizant that when there are products in the movies that I watch, that somebody paid for those to be there. Somebody paid for whatever watches in the scene, whatever media or the computers are in the scene, or if you see somebody wearing a T-shirt or a hat, or, that's all very planned. And I'm very aware that there was something, it's manipulative, I feel.
Well, and it's also sponsored content. Right? It's something that we've had to train ourselves to recognize in our news feeds. When I'm scrolling through a feed and I'm looking at stuff that friends and various associates on social media have posted, and I'm careful when something sucks me in to go back and say, wait a second, do I know the person who posted this? And look for that sponsored content notification. I'm not as much of a movie buff, but there are certain TV shows that I like to binge watch. And I'll tell you, I have those cringe moments when I see product placement in something. And I think the first time I really became conscious of it, I'm a huge Survivor fan. My whole family were all Survivor fans. And it was the first time they started doing the product placement in Survivor that I thought, wow, like, this was a place where I accepted the commercials between the scenes, but I don't accept the commercials embedded in the content that I came to watch.
But
right?
Do you
that
think
was my point of frustration?
The reason why is because now with our, and this is not new technology, but we've been able to forward through the ads for a long time. And so once people realize that we don't, commercials are optional, all of a sudden advertising had to become far more subversive. And finding ways to advertise without us being able to, skip through it like we do when we're streaming television. So, Jacquelyn, can I ask you, are you incorporating anything into Media Literacy Week? I know in your role as an educator, it seems like you have media literacy year-round.
I do have media literacy year round. And while I appreciate Media Literacy Week, one of the things that I appreciate the most about it is that its timing always falls, about 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half before many people start voting. And I don't think that that's accidental. It doesn't account for people who are early voting, that we will have some sort of an increased, increased awareness of how we're interacting with media. But I think it's important to see that it does coincide with election season. That being said, I do a lot with various forms of media literacy throughout the year. And one of the things that I've been focusing on since we've been in this pandemic situation with school shutdowns and things like that is trying to help school counselors expand their repertoire for helping students use social media as a way to investigate their post-high school, their post-secondary plans. And in some ways, not just to find out what options are available to them, but also to really understand the programs that they're researching in a much more authentic way than they actually will get from a university or a college or gap year program or internship program website, where it's our best foot forward, very carefully crafted messages, very carefully selected images, to the social media where, again, things are curated and carefully selected, but are also as likely to be spontaneous and a little bit more authentic, and help students to research what they want to do through the various social media feeds. I had a team of counselors working at a workshop. I had them all in different tables, and there was a contest. They each selected one university or college, and I gave them 5 minutes to see how many social media feeds associated with that college they could find. And I had a whole bunch of swag that I was going to give to the table that won. I was blown away that the team that won found more than 250 unique social media accounts for one university, from admissions and financial aid to career services to all of the clubs and activities and athletics and the different academic departments and scholarship opportunities. The list went on and on and on for the different kinds of feeds that they found. And what we then did was take all that information and look at what are the essays that these colleges are asking students to write for their application, and found I can really write a meaningful essay about why this college is a good match for me when I start looking at their lacrosse team doing the ice bucket challenge, and their field hockey team adopting a neighborhood and doing a street cleanup, and the different clubs that are being launched on campus. I can really talk about why I feel like I have a home at that school. So that's one of the things that I'm doing, because it's so difficult now for students to really investigate what their post-secondary plans are going to be. They can't go to colleges and have the same kind of visits and tours and things like that.
Well, so, and this really comes back to this idea that media literacy is a life skill. And it's a life skill that becomes, I think raising this kind of awareness is important, because as librarians, school librarians in the schools working with every single kid in that building, we have an opportunity, because I'm guessing, and I think I'm probably correct on some level, that this isn't something that is oftentimes taught in the classroom itself. So I wanted to sort of revisit that. Can I ask you, Melissa, when did you realize the importance of media literacy in your library program and lessons?
When I was thinking about how I was going to answer this question, a bunch of stuff ran through my brain. And the first thing that came to mind is there wasn't just one point. It's kind of been this evolution. And I have been a very media aware person basically my entire adult life. And so I feel like getting into this library position, I thought it was going to be a really great way to connect some of the things I've learned along the way and as a classroom teacher, and then I would have access to the entire student body, which would put me at an advantage instead of just my own classroom with those like 25 to 30 kiddos in front of me at any one time. And one of the things, a memory that came to me was, I don't know how long ago it was, but I might have been a first-year librarian, or maybe this was even before I became an official librarian. I attended School Library Journal Base Camp. It was the first one they ever had. It was in Boston. And Michelle Luhtala, who is the co-author on Jackie's book, she was presenting about topics such as these. And I'm sure it probably was right before the 2016 election. So it's kind of that election year. So there was a lot of stuff about all of that in the news. And I was shocked and horrified to find out that people were hired by different organizations to spread news that was not true. And there was an NPR piece, and I don't know right now, I'd have to look it up, but there was somebody found out the name of a person and the location of where this person lived that had posted this false information about something having to do with a candidate in the election. And they actually went to this person's house, and this interview documents this. And anonymously, he agreed to talk to them. And he admitted that, yes, I was hired to fabricate and generate this story and put it out there for people to read and consume and believe. And I was like, oh my God, like I have to know more about this myself, because am I consuming this media and having the same, I'm not digging deep enough. Am I resharing things on my Facebook and my Twitter and my social media to friends and family out there without really knowing what I'm resharing? And it just was like a call to action to me, because I would see my students and watch how they consumed media kind of mindlessly. And I needed to do something. So that was kind of the moment that I figured that not just only me, but every adult in the world needs to know these basic skills. And I've just been kind of on that journey ever since. And that's why I'm very excited to be connected more directly with Jackie and in her role at School Library Connection, because I feel like it's going to be a very great way to learn some hands-on strategies. And then when Thinkalong came along this summer as well, I'm like, everything's happening right now. It's all coalescing, and I'm going to have some tangible things to share with both my students and then the greater library community.
Well, and I have to say, as an adult consuming NPR for my entire life, but I will say I am very aware that when I read somewhere, and I'm kicking myself, but you made me think of this now, and it was some sort of statistic as to how many social media posts are forwarded and shared without the person actually reading what it is they are sharing, without reading what it is they're actually retweeting or posting. And on more than one occasion, individuals with considerable numbers of followers in very high up places of government authority have been known to promote and retweet and share out posts which, had you watched the video, had you read the article, had you considered the source where that information came from, you would realize that there was so much more than just the headline at the top. That it really is irresponsible of us, and I am guilty on occasion of sharing something out of enthusiasm and yet not taking that all too important step to investigate, to look at what that post is before I retweet or before I share something out on social media. Have I made the decision that this is something that I want not only reflected of me and who I am as a person, but that this is a source that can be trusted, and this is a source that it's credible. And I realize that we share that responsibility as people on social media, that if you are going to promote something or share something or retweet it, that you'd best take a few minutes to determine whether or not this is something that is worth perpetuating.
Yeah, I want to add to that. If anybody follows the New Yorker writer Andrew Marantz, his book called Antisocial: Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation is a really thoughtful and considered examination of meme culture and of the creation of content for the sake of engagement and becoming viral. And engagement is not necessarily thoughtful conversation. Engagement isn't even endorsement. Engagement is a reaction. And the way in which certain people are really digitally literate, so they know how to use the processes of the internet, and they're also media literate, so they know how to create content that engages, and they put those two things together to hijack and derail conversations. And in many cases, the only gain they're getting from it is kind of a twisted amusement. It's not even financial for some of them. For some of them it is, but really it's just the amusement at the power that the combining of those skills has given them.
Jackie, how far along in your career, when did you become aware that media and news literacy was something that was going to be so prominent as a professional? Because obviously, friends Melissa and I are both librarians in the school, and Jackie is an instructor. And but I want to know, when was that? Did you have a light bulb moment, or?
Well, so that's interesting because, like Melissa, it has been an ongoing accumulation of experiences. Also, like Melissa, I began in the social studies world before I transitioned into the library world, and I was teaching American government. And teaching American government really highlights what kind of media literacy the people in a learning community have. So 12 years ago, I was doing a project every year with my American government classes that we called Media Watch. And at the beginning of a semester, the students would generate a list of what they thought were important topics that people just should have some insight about, to be considered well-informed citizens. Then they would divide up the topics in small groups, and they had to identify a range of media sources that they were going to use to try to learn as much as they could over the course of the semester about that topic. And we would have regular moments of sharing in the classroom where they would update one another about how their topic was evolving and how their understanding was evolving. And that was, back before we were talking so much about viral media and things like that, that was rather eye-opening for them to see how just different news outlets handled or considered different stories, how different people would interpret the exact same source very differently than one another, and then how the spin would emanate from those interpretations. But from that, I moved into library world, and what was really, really a kick for me to really get invested in this was the Stanford History Education Group, or SHEG, when they released their Civic online reasoning report. That really was kind of a watershed moment in late 2016, because when they were out in schools, and this was in middle schools, high schools, and with college-age students, they had an instrument to measure people's ability to reason about online information that they were receiving. They had to go back to the drawing board, because the students that they were interacting with didn't have the skills to manage their instrument, and they actually had to recalibrate. And even upon recalibrating, abysmal is the word in their executive summary that stands out. Students' civic online reasoning skills were abysmal. And from that, SHEG grew this massive project to provide curricular materials for free to educators to help build both educator media literacy and student media literacy. Because I think we have to acknowledge that we're all in unfamiliar waters. And for teachers to work with students to develop student media literacy, the educators first have to develop their own media literacy. And that can be very, very uncomfortable. And it can be a place where a lot of adults don't have a lot of confidence when it comes to their own media literacy, finding themselves being duped by different stories. Then they certainly don't want to be part of that happening to their own students in their own classrooms, right? And then really this became a passion of mine when I was accepted into the Google Innovator program, and I went to Stockholm, Sweden in 2017 for the Academy Deep Dive. And my colleague and my students' media literacy was the problem in education that I was trying to solve, and so that's really where I started working hard on this topic.
Wow. I'm just blown away. There's so many things I want to go back and revisit about this. And I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with Stephen Tatro about using Wikipedia wisely, and talking about how it really is the rich resources in the citations that give Wikipedia an edge. But, teaching our students, when they look at those citations in a Wikipedia entry, the reality is that not all students have the ability to discern how central or how left-leaning or how right-leaning some of these media sources are. And so that kind of sophistication to be able to look at news media and discern that sort of, whether it is a conservative or a rather liberal, or it's a sort of middle of the road, portrayal of whatever has happened. And I think that does require a great deal of perspective on the part of our students. And I know a lot of adults, we aren't necessarily any better at it. Melissa, I want you to help me out here, because as an elementary librarian, I know a lot of our listeners are elementary, and it's so important that we start talking about these things when our students are younger. But help me understand, some of these topics in media literacy just seem too advanced for our youngest students. What can you do, with our younger kids?
Well, I just want to preface it that I am no way, shape, or form an expert in this, but I do have some ideas. And I think it just goes back to really just good teaching overall. And the idea that we give students space to talk about things. And that I actually was having this conversation with a friend yesterday. She has a kindergartner, and we were talking just about how, he recognizes certain things and symbols, and he knows it was something more related to kind of like language and words and reading. But I connected it back to the idea that, well, how young was he when he recognized McDonald's, right? Like, it's crazy the amount of stuff coming at all of us visually on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. And when you have your kiddos in front of you, just open up a conversation and look for ways to connect what they're seeing in their media and their games and their apps and their devices. And just, start with the conversation and see what they know. And try to guide that and listen to their ideas, and then give them some strategies. And in my opinion, I was a 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade teacher. That's the youngest I ever went in the classroom. But I do think that you can have these conversations with kindergartners, 1st graders, 2nd graders, 3rd graders, and just ask them to observe the world around them, to open their eyes and to continue to ask why. When they come into kindergarten, everything is why. And we know that we kind of beat that curiosity out of them slowly but surely throughout the course of their elementary career by just telling them what they should know. But that going to more of an inquiry model, I think, is really kind of a foundational piece that we need to create critical consumers of information in society in general. And when you do that, by the time then they get to me in the middle school, as a teacher or a librarian, they have somewhat of a foundation, and they don't believe everything that they see or that they hear just because it was said or that they saw it. So that's just one kind of like an entry point into that, in my opinion.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. Jacquelyn, let's pivot a little. I want you to help me make this connection between media literacy and emotional literacy. And, I think that if you can make that connection for me, I would really appreciate, might help me better understand. Absolutely.
And I think it dovetails well with what Melissa was just talking about with little kids. I'm a big fan of the NPR program on the media, and Brooke Gladstone made a comment during one of the episodes of a couple of years ago where she said that in the final analysis, confirmation bias has nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with feeling. And that's the approach that I use when I'm talking to people about their media literacy, that the goal of a content creator is to get a reaction out of you. So when I'm encountering a piece of media and I start to feel just a little bit angry or just a little bit excited or just a little bit joyful or just a little bit schadenfreude, like that content's working on me. And when those feelings happen, when I start to become a little bit agitated or a little bit aroused, that's beginning to suppress my critical thought. And I'm going to go with my gut instead of going with my head. Even if my head is hammering at me, trying to tell me, don't listen to your gut this time. Don't listen to your gut this time. And so, when I think about little kids, I think about I think it was the Dr. Seuss book, My Many Colored Days. I don't know if you've seen that book, but I loved that book with my kids when they were little, and they're 20 and 22 now. But we used to talk about what a feeling can look like, right? When you have the blue days or the buzzy like a bee yellow days or the gray days, and that to me is the beginning of the media literacy conversation, because when you encounter a video or a song or a photograph or a drawing somebody has done, then pause and think internally, how am I feeling on the inside? And what am I inclined to do or to say to someone because of this feeling that has been stirred in me by this thing that I saw or listened to? And so when Melissa was talking about the inquiry approach, I think a corollary to that inquiry approach is, how do you feel? We've been looking at these pictures, and how do you feel? When I do workshops with adults, back in the day when we could do this in person, I have a stack. I'm holding my hands up, and I know you can't see that, but I have a stack about 2 feet high of tabloid publications. That's what we'll call them. The Globe and the Inquirer and things like this. That when I was a kid, they were always at the checkout line, right, in the supermarket. And my mom would always say, when I would be pointing, "Elvis has a love child." What does that mean, Elvis has a love child, right? And she would say, "Oh, you don't want people to see you pointing at that." And I would say, well, why not? And she would say, "Well, it's not really real." And I would say, "Well, why?" As a kid, I was asking, but why can this be in what to me looked like a newspaper? So I pass those out in a workshop and give 0 directions. I've done this with high schoolers. I've done this with adults. 0 directions. And immediately everybody's opening it and paging through it. And they're sharing with each other the stories they see and their reactions to it. And they're laughing at the really awful photographs of people and feeling a little smug that the worst possible picture that person has ever taken is what was chosen for that publication, right? And then I say, okay, stop, and we put it away. And what people eventually come to is, that's old school clickbait, right? Something was put in front of you that just piqued your curiosity enough, for better or for worse, that you wanted to keep going and you wanted to keep digging. And now you were sucked into this whole bizarre world of mistruths, untruths, misinformation, disinformation. And so I think it's back to that emotional intelligence piece. It's being able to gauge how you are viscerally responding to media so that you can say, hang on a second, I need a meta moment. I need to pause. I need to step back. I need to regulate before I can come back and re-engage in this, so that I'm bringing my critical thought to it rather than my emotional response.
Friends, I'm smiling. I want to tie into this. First of all, On the Media, fantastic programming by NPR. I am a regular consumer of a weekly broadcast from the BBC called Trending. And it's a podcast, and it is in-depth reporting on the world of social media. And when I became a school librarian, I became very aware of how social media is such an important influence. It can't be ignored of our students and of ourselves. And the BBC does a really fantastic job of really tackling topics which, apply to people worldwide. And they do talk about how when our emotions are heightened is when we are so likely to share and forward and to step back and like you said, have that meta moment to recognize why you are feeling the way you are about whatever it is you are being bombarded with, and recognize that maybe there's a reason why you're having that response. But friends, I do want to recommend the BBC's Trending podcast, because it really does open your eyes to how social media is being manipulated in a way that can affect all of us, irrespective if we're having an election or we're living through a pandemic.
Yeah, I used to tell my students that, when I was in middle school and high school, and I'll date myself, that was back in the 80s. If we wanted to, if we couldn't text one another or Snapchat or something like that. And so we would write notes, right? Do you remember doing this? Like, you'd write a note while you were in class and you'd fold it up into this tiny little wad of paper. And then as we walked down the hallway going from one class to another, you could slip the note into your friend's locker, right? And then when your friend came back to their locker after class, they would get the note you'd left them. And that's time, that 90 seconds of walking down the hallway, or 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it was, that time that you walked from one class to another, that was that reflective moment where you could decide, or I could decide, let me own it, I could decide, do I want to actually say this to this person? And sometimes it was just a silly little note and I would slip it in the locker, but sometimes it was something that was said in an emotional response to something. And that walk down the hallway gave me that space to say, I didn't really want to say that to that person, and to throw it away or pocket it and just be able to let it go. And the immediacy of social media to respond to things. There are lots of things that are wonderful about social media, but the place that it does damage is it has removed for us that ability to just take a moment before we respond.
I want to ask Melissa, because I had, until we talked about having this episode, and I'll be perfectly frank, I had never heard of the National Association for Media Literacy website. And friends, it is amongst the many resources that are in today's show notes. I was so grateful that they had a tab of resources directed towards librarians and educators and parents. You know, I want to think this is a great resource where listeners could go to get an idea of how to start working media literacy into our library programs.
Most definitely. And that's been one of the things that I have also greatly appreciated in my journey since really this summer, where I've been doing a deep dive. There are so many different things out there that it almost becomes overwhelming to know where to go and what to choose, as is the world of a librarian. Like, we curate like crazy. And then the key is to finding how are we going to take something specific and actually turn it into something that we go and use with students. So Nomly, like you had mentioned, has some like actual lessons and different things you can use. Another organization we haven't yet had a chance to talk about is the News Literacy Project. And they are also amazing. And I've actually had the privilege of talking with Shaylin Farnsworth, who is their new education person, and she's been involved with our state conference for the last couple of years. So I was really excited to see on their Twitter page that they're at News Lit Proj, P-R-O-J. You can follow them. And they are doing amazing work. And one of the things that I am really excited to dig deeper into, which I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I know it's there, is they have units of lessons that you can take, and it's all kind of ready to go. Again, I do think the ones I had been looking at were more like 6th grade and up focused. I think, I'm not sure if they're doing a lot for the littles right now, because I live in the world of middle school. So that's where I've been focusing my search. However, if you reach out to them, they are very responsive, both via email and Twitter. And one of the other connections that I had with them just recently, so School Library Journal did one of their online events sometime this spring. I can't even remember when it was. Everything blends together. I do know I didn't have power that day, and I had to go to a friend's house because I didn't have internet. I do remember it was like right after the tropical storm where we lost power for 6 days. And the keynote lunch speaker was Peter Adams from the News Literacy Project. And he gave the most mind-blowing presentation. I've watched it 3 times. And he showed us through like images online that we can't believe even what our eyes are showing us so many times. And he gave this example that he took this picture of this huge crowd gathered, and the caption for this picture was something about protesting. I think it was anti-maskers is what the caption said. It was something to do with COVID for sure. And he said that he did the research back. He gave like 5 different strategies for people to analyze these photos they're seeing on their social media feeds. He figured out with a combination of these strategies that it was not a recent picture. It wasn't in Germany, even like, I think that's where Berlin, I think is where they had put it, but it was really maybe in like Austria or something, or Switzerland. And he was able to use like GPS and like Google Maps to really find this particular location. I mean, it just blew my mind how it was just so methodical. Because when I get into arguments, and I do, with family members and friends saying that they believe these things and not even questioning it, I don't really have, I guess, the skills to argue back or give them just that, well, what have you thought about this, or do this and see if it still holds true. And he gave that to me as a teacher and a person, and that's something I can pass on to my students.
looking at this, friends, it is a link in the show notes, and the newslit.org. It's fantastic because it does talk about confirmation bias and how we tend to feed ourselves a diet of information that will simply reaffirm what we already want to believe. And it's such an important skill, but I love what you're talking about. But I will tell you, I have taught my students how to do reverse image searches, and this is a very sort of entry-level way to question what you're seeing. And doing a reverse image search, and you can oftentimes, those geolocations can be confirmed, and all too often manipulative information is being produced. And if you go back and do those reverse image searches, you find that they have been misused. And I think that is something I'm telling you, fifth graders can figure out how to do a reverse image search. It's not hard.
And can I add one thing that popped into my mind? Actually, it goes back to your question earlier about what can you do with elementary students, and then this conversation too. There's an amazing book it's called Two Truths and a Lie. It's actually a series now. This was a science one, so it had science topics, and the subtitle is It's Alive. It's by Amy Joan Paquette and Lori-Ann Thompson. And I came across this book a few years ago, and some of the other librarians and I created some lessons around some of the chapters. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that game, Two Truths and a Lie, you ask somebody to tell them two things about themselves that are real and one that is false. And you try to guess. And so we took, it was 7th grade science. They do human body. We took the chapter on some like body things. So the stories are so funny, some of them, and just like they all seem sort of ridiculous, but they're like, I mean, when you talk about body functions with 7th graders, it usually goes over pretty well because that's kind of a normal topic of conversation, it seems like, with them. So there were 3 different stories. One was, I can't remember the details, so I'm not going to say what they are right now, but I think it was chapter 7. And it was a whole week I got to spend with them, and reverse image searching is what triggered it for me when you mentioned that, Amy, because that was one of the activities we did with them. And they had never done that. The teacher had never seen that. And it was just really mind-blowing to them how they could look and see where an image originated from. And that was just one small subset. And then again, another connection to my culture of reading that I always try to plug whenever I talk about anything. The author, Lori-Ann Thompson, was offering free Skype visits, like 15-minute Q&A sessions. So I had been looking online at her website when I was planning this, and I saw this, and I signed up for a few of them because it was 7th grade, so I had 5 different sections I was teaching. And oh my God, the kids were so into it. It was one of the most successful lesson mini units that I've really planned as a librarian and then was able to deliver. So they just last year came out with a social studies theme, like history themed book of Two Truths and a Lie. So definitely check that out. And I do think it's like for grades 4 and up for readability for sure. But even the youngers would get a kick out of some of the news stories. And again, every chapter has 1 or 2 stories that are real and then 1 that is false. So
I'm going to ask you, would you please make sure to put that link in the show notes, please? Okay.
I will.
So I want to tag off of that just because. Two Truths and a Lie has been a really super fun game to play when we are teaching through Zoom and through Google Meet. And the teacher and I got to participate as the librarian because I dropped in. And this was a 2nd grade teacher. And she had tasked the kids with writing down 2 truths and a lie. And it's super easy on when you're looking at your Zoom screen or your Meet screen, because when a student shares their 2 truths and a lie, the rest of the class holds up the number of fingers, which one they think is true. So you would see on your screen, you would see students with a 3 up or students with a 2 up or students with a 1 up. And it was very easy, and it was a very visual and engaging way. And obviously our kids were doing 2 truths and a lie about themselves, but for the participants, it was really fun because we could easily indicate which we thought was the truth. So I love that we have this opportunity to introduce it to our younger students because it is important that we give them this opportunity to start thinking critically. So, Jackie, before I let you go, would you please, for those of us who are tackling media and news literacy for the first time in our library programs, what advice would you give to listeners?
Wow. So I think that there's an urgency to this work right now. And you mentioned confirmation bias. And I think that that's a key issue here, right? That we look for the content that makes us comfortable. We look for the content that reaffirms what we think is true. And I think there's another kind of bias that's important here, and that's implicit bias, that we also look for content that reinforces notions that we're not even overtly aware we have. And there's a tremendous amount of social upheaval happening in the United States right now. And that really is a call to action, I think, for all of us to examine those implicit biases. And so my advice to someone who's starting out with this is to start with yourself first, and be honest and authentic about where your own implicit biases and confirmation biases are coming into play as you try to become more media literate, and then be able to share that with your students to create some safety in that space, because we all make mistakes in this realm. It's impossible not to. In a 24/7 constant streaming world of media, it's impossible not to make mistakes. So starting with self and owning that with your students helps your students to then say, okay, I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm doing this in a place where people are going to help me to get better at this. And I'm getting better at this because it's important for all of us. It's important for our communities. It's important for our nation. It's important globally that we begin to learn how to interact more honestly and more authentically with one another.
Friends, I'm having one of those moments when I'm very aware that this podcast, at the very least, is helping me become a better human being. I hope that when you listen to this episode, it gives us the kind of pause and opportunity for self-reflection that allows us to not only be better educators for our students because they deserve it, but we need to be better human beings. And so I appreciate all that Jackie has brought to this conversation, because it really does stop me in my tracks, and it does call to us to be better as people when we are consuming and sharing out what we encounter when it comes to media. Melissa, I'll let you have the last word, because you know, as a school librarian who's been including media literacy in your program now for several years, you are talking to people who in many cases haven't. So how would you go about tackling this for the first time?
Well, and I just want to start with thanking both of you so much for letting this happen. Thank you, Jackie, you have added just so much to this conversation. And I as well have wrote down a whole page full of notes that I'm going to take away with me to continue. Both you and Amy. Awesome. Amy just sent us her notes and they're unbelievably awesome. And I think I'm going to reiterate a little bit of what Jackie said. Just we start with ourselves. We have to be authentic. We have to know where we are on this whole continuum. And then we have to just be honest about what we don't know. And that is so okay. I feel like so many teachers and librarians out there are afraid to admit that they don't know about something. And I think it's a strength to be able to identify what you know and what you don't know. And it's a fabulous model for your learners. And that's something I live and practice every day in my life. And I always have. I'm a lifelong learner, and I always ask for help, and I find the people who know the answers, which is one of the main reasons that I was like, I can't do this by myself for this podcast because I don't have enough of the information to share. So I need to find an expert to me, which is definitely Jacquelyn Whiting. She is one of them that I go to, and I'm very fortunate to be connected with her in a variety of ways. And the other thing is when you find success and you have some things to share them. Don't stay in your own little bubble. I really challenge all of you out there listening to get out there and move on from being a lurker, which is absolutely okay and is part of the continuum. But then you need to actually get out there and share as well and add to the conversation and contribute to the community. I did add in the show notes the title for Two Truths and a Lie. That's a tongue twister. And I also actually linked to my folder in Drive, my resource folder, with just everything that I use to plan. And this was not just me. I want to give definitely credit to the librarians in my district, Shannon McNeese and Dave St. Germain in West Hartford Public Schools. They are amazing. And there were other librarians involved at part of this, and the classroom teachers, because this is a true collaboration. I could not do this lesson without the science teacher, who at the time was Miss Bennett and Miss White. And they have just... You have to have those relationships with those teachers, and they learned as much as the kids did, I swear. And I learned so much planning it. So I wanted to share that for you so you can take that as kind of a model. You can make a copy and make it your own. Just always be good librarians and give credit where you found it originally. But thank you so much, Amy, for this. This is such a great topic, and I really am excited for feedback from people. So find us on social media and just let us know what you're thinking and what you can add.
Well, I know that listeners PLN always it grows. My own grows exponentially. And before I go, let's review. Jackie, can you share where we can find you on social media?
Absolutely, but not until I share the thanks that's going around, because this has been such a treat, and I really, really appreciate being included in the conversation. So thank you. You can find me on Twitter at Ms. J. Whiting, MSJWHITING, and you can find me on Instagram, where I made a typo in my name, at JACQUEYLNWHITING. And I am happy to continue the conversation with anybody. I really, really enjoy the ongoing learning, and please do follow me. Please do tag me in the work that you're doing so I can celebrate what you're doing with you and learn from you and alongside you. Thank you so much.
All right, perfect. And friends, if you're not listening to Melissa Thom, I strongly encourage that you go back, listen to her two previous episodes. But if you aren't already following Melissa Thom on social media, Melissa, will you help us out?
Absolutely. So my both Twitter and Instagram is Miss Thom Bookitis, and it's MSTHOMBOOKITIS. And I'm also on Facebook at Joyful Learning. So there is a link directly to my Facebook page. And I do want to encourage all of you also to check out Thinkalong's Facebook group. And on Twitter, it is at Thinkalong123, because I am the social media person. So I am doing a lot of the posting on that account as well. And we're sharing a lot of really great content. So thank you so much, Amy.
Oh, I am so grateful for this episode. You too. I cannot wait to put this out and share it with the rest of our listening group. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I still can't believe that this interview happened, because I got to tell you, friends, coordinating the schedules of 3 people to have an interview during the school year is quite a feat. So thank you so much to Melissa and to Jackie for working together. We had this great collaboration, and one that hasn't happened on the podcast yet. And that is with 3 people coming together to talk about something as important as media literacy. And I truly hope that you have learned a lot and also have this time to consider how you might incorporate media literacy in your library program looking forward. So, friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The show notes for today's episode are full of terrific resources and links to everything referenced in my interview with Melissa and Jackie. You can also find an editable PD certificate, which you can access and submit digitally if your district awards professional development credit for listening to podcasts. And if you don't know if your district does or doesn't, it's worth asking, because during this time where budgets are tight and, quite honestly, conferences are not happening, and if they are, well, they're happening virtually. And by the way, they still cost money. So anyway, just putting it out there. I hope you're having a great week. And I'll tell you what, this weekend, we've got a great episode coming up, and that is my conversation with New Zealand school librarian Penny Walsh. I hope you will tune in.